Theo Clarke, you had a baby a couple of years ago, and often people don't talk about the gory details of childbirth, but you spoke very movingly in the House of Commons about your very traumatic experience. You've written a book, Breaking the Taboo. Can you just tell us briefly what happened to you?
So in the last Parliament, I had a baby and had a very traumatic birth. I had a 40-hour labour, ended up bleeding very heavily after delivery, having a postpartum hemorrhage, and I'm afraid got rushed into emergency surgery. And I spent nearly 2 hours awake on the operating table. And to be honest, it was absolutely terrifying. I thought I was going to die. I thought I'd never see my daughter again. I thought my husband was going to be a single dad. And afterwards, when I came out, I remember being in this side room with my daughter, who I couldn't pick up, and pressing the emergency button for help. And someone came in and said, "Not my baby, not my problem," and walked out and left me there. And it was really that experience that kind of opened my eyes to the lack of aftercare in this country for mothers, and that led me to start campaigning on improving maternity care across the UK.
And you heard lots of really very harrowing experiences that mothers have had. You launched an inquiry. You passed those recommendations on to the previous government. What's happened about that since?
So I chaired the birth trauma inquiry last year after so many mothers wrote to me after I gave my speech, and I've included some of the news stories in the books. I think it's so important to hear their testimony. And our headline recommendation last year was to have a national maternity improvement strategy, because we didn't feel that NHS care was standardised across maternity. And the previous Prime Minister, Rishi Sunak, had accepted that. He made an announcement about it in the House of Commons in response to my PMQ. But unfortunately, we're now 10 months on to the new government. We've had no major announcements on the birth trauma inquiry recommendations by the Health Secretary. So I'm very much calling on the government today, 1 year on from our report, to implement those recommendations and to improve maternity care across this country.
But that's changed, isn't it? Because Wes Streeting had seemed to be very supportive while they were in opposition.
Well, I took the time when he was the Shadow Health Minister to meet with him in person and to go through the recommendations of the inquiry. We had a lot of warm words of support, but I think it's now time for the government to take action. I mean, they've been in power now for many months, and I think families know what needs to be changed, and they're now asking for the government to implement it. And this government has to take action urgently now to improve care. Donna Ockenden wrote the foreword to my book. She's obviously investigating the baby deaths and avoidable tragedies in a number of hospitals. And it's time to act now for these families. We need to get action on improving maternity care.
The government, of course, very short of money. The NHS too. What are the consequences for the government not acting? What is this meaning for women and families?
Well, there was a very concerning report out from the Public Accounts Committee yesterday saying how the medical negligence budget has actually been increased. So that's crazy to think that we're spending more money on compensation payouts on maternity than we are on the frontline services in maternity units themselves. So this is something that the government needs to take a grip of. We want to have more midwives, obstetricians and anaesthetists on the front line looking after mothers directly. And that means the government must be funding and prioritising maternity care. And that's why this is such an important issue.
And just finally, we have a falling birth rate in this country. That's got very serious consequences. Do you feel that, well, will you have another child? Do you feel that maternity services are, an impediment to people having families?
So I've decided not to have another baby because of my very traumatic experience. And I should say that my experience was particularly bad, and a lot of mothers watching the show, should feel safe going into their maternity units. But unfortunately, we do know around 30,000 women every year are going on to develop PTSD who've had a traumatic birth. So that's why I also have a podcast called Breaking the Taboo to be talking about this, because there seems to be such a stigma and a shame about issues with women's health. And I hope by me very publicly speaking about it in the chamber of the House of Commons, kind of hope to break that taboo about speaking about it and encourage other mothers to feel less alone, that they can ask for help, because this is something that's happened to them, not because of them. And I hope that the government takes action to support those families.
Theo Clarke, thank you very much for talking to us today on GBNews. Thank you. Thank you.
And former Conservative MP Theo Clarke has criticised the government for its lack of progress in improving maternity care in England and Wales. Yes, Ms Clarke has campaigned on the issue since making an emotional speech in the House of Commons back in 2023.
Well, our political correspondent Catherine Forster caught up with Theo Clarke a little bit earlier on. Catherine, tell us exactly what Theo is arguing for then.
Yes, well, fundamentally, she was so traumatised by her experience that when she spoke in the House of Commons, she broke down, the clip went viral. She was then inundated with messages from other women that had similarly harrowing experiences. So she held an inquiry. She came up with a lot of recommendations for improving maternity care in England that the previous government said that they would act on. Wes Streeting, the health secretary, made all sorts of warm noises about while in opposition, but has since gone very, very quiet about. Let's listen first to Theo's own personal experience a few years ago.
Last Parliament, I had a baby and had a very traumatic birth. I had a 40-hour labour, ended up bleeding very heavily after delivery, having a postpartum hemorrhage, and I'm afraid got rushed into emergency surgery. And I spent nearly 2 hours awake on the operating table. And to be honest, it was absolutely terrifying. I thought I was going to die. I thought I'd never see my daughter again. I thought my husband was going to be a single dad. And afterwards, when I came out, I remember being in this side room with my daughter, who I couldn't pick up, and pressing the emergency button for help. And someone came in and said, "Not my baby, not my problem," and walked out and left me there. And it was really that experience that kind of opened my eyes to the lack of aftercare in this country for mothers, and that led me to start campaigning on improving maternity care across the UK.
So she's campaigning on this. She's written a book, Breaking the Taboo, and she says that about 30,000 women a year have a really bad experience during delivery. So she's saying to the government, look, you need to provide the proper care for women having babies. There was a recent Care Quality Commission report back in 2023 said that 2/3 of maternity units were giving substandard care. And coupled with this, the bill for NHS medical negligence, according to the Public Accounts Committee, is now hitting £58.2 billion. So there was 2.8 billion paid out by the NHS for medical negligence just last year. Her argument is put the money into maternity care now and avoid these complications and avoid potentially being sued, and do what really should be very basic when somebody is giving birth, to give them the level of care that they need.
Thank you so much for bringing us that, our political correspondent there. Gosh, worrying being a woman, isn't it?
Well, I feel particularly... this is hard for you because you are heavily pregnant and about to experience this. I feel bad talking about this with you.
I just hope for the best.
She said 30,000 people have very difficult experiences, but there were nearly 600,000 births last year. So it is, you know...
Quite a big percentage, isn't it?
Well, yes, 3 out of 60. 3 out of 60. But yeah, so about 5%. But, I mean, I've obviously given birth 3 times. It's not a nice experience, but it's over fairly quickly in the grand scheme of things. And I just think that one of the big problems is that midwives are so overstretched because there aren't enough of them, that it does remove some of the humanity from the situation. Because if the midwife is stressed, it's much harder for them to empathise with the mother giving birth and things like that.
I just always assumed it would all be fine and I'd be in and out in a flash, but, you know, you can be there for days,
Well,
weeks.
I know plenty of people who have been in and out in hours and back on the feet. It's just, you know, you can't predict these things. But
I mean, the stats on this are pretty shocking, aren't they, on maternity care in this country? You would have thought we'd be, you know, doing pretty well in that area, but apparently not. So many of our maternity care, it's a postcode lottery, isn't it? And
also, I think that the emphasis on natural birth above all else, when actually a C-section would be... My third child was back-to-back delivery, and I should have had a caesarean probably, but they wanted a natural birth. So, you know, I think... Obviously, everybody wants to avoid a caesarean if possible, but sometimes it just is the right thing to do.
There you go, for the men out there. Advocate for your women.
Absolutely. Well, I think that's really important, actually, that the partner is clued up, knows what to ask for, and knows when something's wrong. I think it is quite important.
Hopefully I won't have to deal with any inexperienced practitioners. I don't know. Anyway.